So today we're going to take notes on subtracting integers. Again, you want to check your table of contents. For this night's homework is September the 6th, and it's subtracting integers, and this is going to be on my page 5. Yours may be a little different. So our objective for subtracting integers is to develop a rule for subtracting positive and negative integers. Your goal is to find the patterns, what's actually going on here. Okay, so we're going to start with 3 minus a positive 1. Now, I know that you know that 3 minus 1 is 2. But again, the goal is to notice a pattern, what's going on here. So we're going to start with 3, and we're going to subtract a positive 1, and that lands us at 2. Where did we move on the number line? And if we were using our integer jail, so we're going to start with 3, because these are zeros. Here's our 3, and we're going to remove a positive 1, and that leaves us positive 2. Again, where did we move on the number line? What happened? So now let's move to 1 minus 2. If we're on our number line, we start at 1, and we take away 2. So we're going to move to the left 2. Where does that end us up on the number line? That puts us at negative 1. So subtracting a positive moves left on the number line. So that's a great question for us. Where do we move on the number line when subtracting a positive? Now, hopefully, this is ringing a bell for you. I'm going to flip back one page. We moved left on our number line. Which one had us moving left on our number line? Adding negatives. So adding negatives and subtracting positives are the same thing. Adding negatives equals subtracting positives. Now, what you need to notice is add is the opposite of subtract, and negative is the opposite of positive. So adding negatives is the same thing as subtracting positives. So subtracting positives is the same thing as adding negatives. At this point, you start to notice, oh, I can change and do whatever I want to make it much easier. So let's try negative 2 minus 1. We're subtracting a positive, so we're going to move left on our number line. So we're going to start at negative 2, and we subtract a positive 1. And so negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. But what if we were subtracting negatives? Let's start with 1, and let's take away 3 negatives. So this part I'm going to start with our integer jail here, because these are all zeros. And I'm going to start with positive 1. Now let's take away 3 negatives. So I'm going to take away this negative, take away this negative, take away this negative. This is still a 0. So 1, take away negative 3. 1, remove 3 negatives, ends up being positive 4. So on our number line, where did we move? If we started at 1, we took away 3 negatives, and we ended up at positive 4. Which direction did we move? We moved to the right, and moving right is the same thing as addition. So where do we move on the number line when subtracting negatives. Where do we move on the number line? When subtracting negatives, we end up moving to the right. And what I like to think of whenever I see this is whenever a kid says, I didn't do nothing. It's what we call a double negative. If you say you didn't do nothing, that means you did something. So if you didn't do nothing, if you subtract a negative, that really means you added. So the other thing I want you to notice is subtracting a negative moves right on the number line. It's the same thing as adding a positive. So subtracting negatives is the same thing as adding positives. Again, they're opposites. Subtracting is the opposite of adding. Negatives is the opposite of positives. So for your summary, subtracting integers is the same as addition with opposites. Subtracting positives is the same as, and in this blank, hopefully you're going to write adding blank, and then subtracting negatives is the same thing as blank. And what would be really great is if you could answer this question. Because remember, subtracting a negative is the same thing as, you can use a number line. So I'm looking for your summary, and I'm looking for the answer to this question here when you come back to class. And that is the end of your subtracting integers notes.